Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. I think this is my favorite topic, and I have an interesting panel from both the different spectrum. I think as we've been knowing, right, DPDPA, which has already been passed in the Parliament 2023, draft rules has also been released for the implementation, for the feedback collected. Now we are just awaiting for the implementation rules to come. And in that case, I think most of the industry, including the banks and insurance firms, are probably getting ready for the DPDPA compliance. And that's with Malcolm and Kiran will try to decipher that how the insurance companies and how the tech firms are enabling the entire process for the DPDPA compliance. I think if you look at the insurance, I think it has one of the product which gets sold through the multiple channels, right? Be it on the bank side, be it on their direct channels, as well as now through the embedded platforms and everything. So with that, Kiran, maybe I'll start with you. If you can share your insights that how the insurers are rethinking their entire the data governance and security framework to align with the DPDPA while maintaining the ensuring that entire the agility and the customer trust.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Hello.
Yeah.
Yeah. So DPDPA is not just a regulatory mandate now. It has becoming a strategic inflection point for the insurers, I should say. So DPDP in India is actually transforming the way the insurers are collecting the data. I think that's because if you really look at collection of data from the agents, from banks, brokers, it has been quite need to be a course correction has to be done around it. And that's the shift which we are going to see. And the industry is also looking out in terms of the way, in terms of the compliance, which was looked at from very reactive, which is getting transforming into a very proactive governance perspective. And the way the PAT was the core for any financial health, I think the PAT is now changing the definition from to privacy, agility, and trust as well. And the way we need in terms of the privacy office, data protection officer, which needs to be appointed. I think there are various regulations which are really coming around, which is really helping into transforming the insurers to becoming more like a trust building and enterprise as well. So I think probably we'll carry on with the discussions gradually.
Thanks, Kiran, for giving her a context. I think Malcolm will come to you. So DPDPA, if you look at it, the act in the holistic, it's like primarily will require lots of the tech and the technology interventions, right? And being in a tech enabler, providing a tech-based solutions. Maybe if you can share your initial thoughts that how the technology and tools are going to evolve to help the insurers to implement the entire the DPDPA and especially at a scale, right? With this complete focus on the compliance, accountability. So if you can share your thoughts.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for having us here, and it's great to collaborate. As IDFI, we're building what we call the trust stack for across sectors, but of course insurance. I think just as we start, I'd like to say whatever we share here is on the back of actual working with customers and live implementations. We've had the privilege of being able to do that, as well as in tens of sort of POCs and implementations we are running. So a lot of it is just very practical sort of learnings that I'll share. I think to answer your question, as Kiran was pointing out, I think insurance at the front end has a lot of ecosystem players. Through the value chain, customers might come once, but kind of don't know when they come again, right? They might come at a claim, they might come after 10 years, they might come after 20 years. So at the point of claim, you might need incremental data versus what you took up front. And then there's also downstream, there are a whole host of other ecosystem providers. You might have people investigating claims and so on and so forth. So I think from a value chain standpoint and how data is collected, where data flows, it has its own intricacies, right? As well as the unpredictability of what incrementally you might need from customers. It's not always very clear. You might, when a claim comes, you might ask for X data. They might ask for some more and then some more. So I think all of those need to be kept in mind as you think about how you do this in insurance. And now with that backdrop, you have to collect consent, purpose specific, as we were talking outside. You need to show customers what data you have about them and be able to then ensure they have access and be able to revoke. You obviously then need to know where the data stands, in what form or shape. Are you applying the right controls around it? That's also what's needed. You need to control your third parties. And it's not enough to say, hey, I've got into a tight contract, right? Especially as a significant data fiduciary or a fiduciary, you need to do more than that. You need to show you're actively tracking, monitoring. You probably can't do that with every single third party, but at least trusted third parties. And then you need to keep monitoring, be aware, handle incidents, breaches. So there's, putting the context of the industry and what's to be done, there's a lot. And therefore, I think we see the role of technology and tooling, and kind of that's what we've built through a platform called Privy by iDefy, which actually does the entirety of this. You can build, and people have built point stuff internally, externally to do this, right? But if you do to that scale and do all of that we spoke about, then you really need a strong sort of platform and backbone which talks to each other, because if you realize all of this is interconnected, right? The more data do you discover, you might have to go back and re-seek consent. Or if you've stored a certain consent and now someone else is coming in for a claim and you're seeking incremental information, you might have to modify that consent, or your downstream systems might have to seek or validate what consent is there before you push out a campaign. So technology and tooling has evolved. I think the only last point I'll make is one or three, in terms of what kind of technology and tooling at least we believe is required. One, it has to be built for India. The way consent is collected, you need to think about physical consent collection, right? You can't just say, oh, there's a digital journey and now I'll collect consent that way. You have to think about, what kind of PI exists in India, what formats it exists in. You should distinguish between an address and a name. And in India, as you know, sometimes addresses can be names. And then you have to be able to, therefore, deploy in sort of the Indian context and environment working with those third parties. So it's not like you can take a standard global platform, deploy it. It has to be built in the Indian context, be deployable in our environment, and then be able to cater to the nuances of the law and regulation, which should, at least we believe, keep evolving. So I think there's a big role for technology and tooling, but like I said, you have to be able to work in this environment and context and be able to keep pace with how evolution takes place.
Thanks, Malcolm. I think you've given a good perspective to that about the technology's role into DPDPA compliance. And one of the interesting points that you brought out, that involvement of the third party in the whole in the insurance, right? If you look at the sales process, as I was talking about, that bank channel could be there. With the now embedded finance coming in, the insurance can be sold at the different platforms. It's an event-driven, some of the sales are happening, right? And every other touch point, managing the consent, managing the notices and all the things is not going to be easy. So now when it comes to the operationalizing the whole of the DPDPA in the organizations, Kiran, primarily I just want to understand that how the insurance going to start their DPDPA compliance journey. And it is widely accepted that, understood that insurance companies will be falling into the significant data fiduciary also, so that your roles and responsibility goes higher than just a normal data fiduciary. So in that role, how do you see that insurance companies are preparing themselves for the DPDPA compliance? What are the steps, considerations that you may like to talk about?
So DPDPA compliance start with knowing your data first, because every enterprises have the deep dark web of the own internal information. I think that is something which needs to get started with. And it ends with empowering the customers, I should say. So start knowing your data, what is the data landscape, and then gradually, and basically post that it is identifying, classifying, and knowing that what kind of a data, the essential data is what kept, whether it is a personal data, financial data, health data, biometric information. So all this information needs to get classified so that those are being available and known as well, because enterprises have the duplication of data as well, which also increases the overheads for that matter. And rightly said by Malcolm, in terms of having a robust purpose-specific consent management tool or a framework which needs to be there in place, and actually followed by having a data protection officer who can oversee the compliance for that matter. Looking at from a security controls perspective, having an advanced encryptions, role-based access controls, and also having in terms of the way the security systems are maturing, the breaches are happening, having a breach detection as well. So having a real-time monitoring of your services, of your tech, is very much required, because the volumetric transactions which insurers also go through is a phenomenal. So you need to have a real-time monitoring of your threats so that the breach notification can also be done accordingly. The other aspect is having the empowering the customers, having the rights which are part of the DPDPA, which needs to be the right to access, right to delete, right to modify, right to nominate as well. These are essential rights which needs to be given to the customers. And the other aspect is also from a third-party auditors as well. So third-party, because insurance, we were hearing from the previous panels as well, the amount of third-party which are integrated in an insurance is phenomenal. From an onboarding till the claims processing, it's all completely dependent on the entire ecosystem. So I think that is something which need to be assessed. So their agreements needs to be audited to ensure that it is in line with the DPDPA compliance. And the other aspect is also from the crossed border data transmission as well. So those also need to be looked at from a DPDPA compliance, also in line with the regulators as well, whether it is an RBI, IRD or SEBI norms. So all these things actually put it across. So basically it's a journey, I should say, where you really need to start, and it need to be built with trust, and started with the clarity as well. So I think, yeah.
Thanks, Kiran. And I think Navir, clarity, that is not an easy journey. It's a very complex web of the networks, the data flow, especially with the third parties and all. And Malcolm also understand that this doesn't apply to the new customer onboarding, the consent and the purpose, but also it goes retrospectively also that you need to handle the compliance. So in that context, as that insurance companies try to operationalize the entire consent structure under the DPDP Act, what is your experience? What are the challenges that they need to be careful about it, what they should plan? And especially the consumer versus enterprise is a zero-sum game kind of things.
Yeah. So I think that I think a lot of some of the things that need to be done, Kiran has sort of spoken about, right? I think I'll probably focus on the part of what you talked about, saying at least the sense we have, and again this is on the back of us seeing this very closely, is at times there is this perception that, oh, it's a trade-off between compliance and user experience, and one versus the other, right? I think and again I think what the journey looks like, Kiran has already well pointed out, right, from your channels to ensuring the journeys are built the right way, to capturing consent, customers being able to view consent, managing your third parties, data discovery, etc. So I think that's the full set of the solution set. But I think the point I would rather focus on is this therefore seen as okay, I now, let's say, need to comply, therefore am I going to lose out, or is this a trade-off between business and compliance, right? So I think as we are implementing, we are seeing three things. I think the first thing is that the urge to do this, and I was just mentioning it to Kiran outside also, is the urge is actually from a compliance standpoint, right? You have to comply to manage risk, so you have to do this. And I think that's also becoming the forcing mechanism to get this off the ground, because people are weighing off, okay, I'm going to do this, because it's a significant effort, as Kiran was saying, right? It's a lot of internal teams' time, businesses' time, technology, all of that. Now, why am I doing it becomes the question. The question is, one is obviously because there's risk and the fine and all of those things. But I think what we're realizing is there are second order, third order value to be captured from here. Second order value is, as you do data discovery, tighten your channels, all of those pieces, you realize that you can actually shrink your data footprint. From our work, we've seen the data footprint can shrink to as much as 10-15%. This is because you're sitting on historic data that you no longer need. Data that was collected in a very different process with a very different from 10 years back. So that is real shrinking of data footprints, real savings in terms of time, cost, storage, right? Then there are risks of managing your third parties much more tightly. As people are going through this exercise, they're realizing the holes, the gaps they had in how data was shared in their contracts. So there's this, that I would call the second bucket of risk, which is largely cost and risk efficiencies coming in. And then the third bucket of value is around what we're calling, which is sort of gradually panning out, is as data footprints get tighter, we've seen the way data is consumed, the analytical models they run on, kind of campaigns you're able to generate out of it, as well as on the consumer side, because they've actually, in some sense, controlled what they want and what they don't want, right? So think about it, right? The enterprise is spending 100 calls and there's one receipt. So I think people are getting the campaign and campaign effectiveness, outreach is going to get a lot sharper. So therefore, we don't see this as a zero-sum game, right? It's a risk versus business. I think there's obviously the need to do this as risk and compliance, but there's real value in terms of cost and risk management, as well as in the slightly longer term, higher trust, better sort of customer experience and trust in the brand and potentially cross-sell and all that.
Oh, thanks, Malcolm. That was good perspective. And as you touched upon, that is managing the risk versus that business also, right? And Kiran, coming to you. Now, if you look at the entire consent structure that has been laid down by DPDPA, it needs to be very granular, like you can't have the bundled consent now. And in the last couple of years, I think insurance companies have simplified the journey a lot, especially if even the customers trying to buy it from your platforms or to third party. Now, if you need to relook that entire the consent management and adding the entire the cybersecurity measures, be it in the encryption of the data during the processing or during the transit, how do you going to look at that entire the transition to manage this entire the consent security and then managing your entire the journey smooth, right? So privacy by design kind of an approach that you need to take. So maybe if you want to share an insurance thought.
Yeah, so privacy by design is a very powerful principle, but it really comes with real world challenges as well, especially in cybersecurity and the consent perspective. So it comes with dual challenges. The first challenge is securing the data, and then it talks about empowering the users. So from a cybersecurity front, we were just looking at the previous presentation demo as well, how the journey of is frictionless journey which we have just seen from a consumer perspective. But if you really look at from the new laws from a cybersecurity perspective, I think data minimization is another principle which is coming. So are we really able to do the risk profiling with an accuracy? That becomes one of the challenge as well. Also the proliferation of the IoTs, devices, the APIs in an API economy, as well as the mobile apps as well. So I think it is increasing the attack surface by multifold, and that is where the enterprises need to have a stronger zero trust framework as well. And obviously, from a security perspective, need to have an advanced encryptions, again the role-based access controls, real-time monitorings as well. So I think these are the I think Malcolm also covered up upon the purpose-specific consent as well, because that is something need to be quite easy in terms of managing the entire life cycle of the consent. That becomes a very important aspect as well. And other is cross-border is another challenge, because the regulations are actually global regulations. If you really see, they are still not stable in terms of from the data transfer perspective, and the third parties as well. They also really need to honor your consent, because there is a dependency also on the third parties in the entire life cycle. I think these are the couple of challenges which really make it, it's going
tough.
to be tough.
Your job tough, right? And every time the product team make a changes, they have to take a sign off from CISO, right? So you'll have to keep ensuring the balance between these two. So Malcolm, I think one thing is clear, that the DPDPA implementation is going to be the leadership-driven approach, right? Yes. At the top to bottom. And since you've been interacting with lots of the senior management across the board, so how can the leaders align privacy, security, and entire the governance effort to meet up that entire the DPDPA compliance requirements, and what actions that you suggest them to start taking immediately?
No, I think again, some of this is direct experience that we'll share. I think like I just said in my previous question, if this is positioned as, oh, we are just doing, I think we are seeing two patterns, right? There are institutions that are saying, hey, listen, we know we had to do this. This is a good push now to do this, and there are all these other benefits, right? Tighter footprints, tighter governance, better experience, making sure none of these things that you shouldn't be collecting is not collected. So I think people are saying, okay, if we truly want to do this in the right manner, with the right spirit, and therefore do it as a proper transformation, that's one view of the world where we are seeing a lot of institutions think that way. And of course, there is another view of the world to say, hey, let me do bare minimum, kind of tick the box, right? I think if bare minimum tick the box always becomes a pure, I need to comply and job done, and I'll do the bare minimum. But a lot of organizations, at least we're seeing, is taking the other approach, which is to say, hey, actually, I can do this in the right spirit and therefore unlock lots of benefits. And if it is done in the right spirit, and therefore, you then think not just about compliance, but other things that I just described in my previous answer, then you have to rally the organization, right? Then you have to get business leaders along. You have to obviously get, the risk organization, the compliance organization along. You have to get the DPO and all of that organization along, right? So it's a proper, full-blown sort of, everybody is involved, right? It's not a tick box effort. So that's one. And you can only do that if you position it in this manner as a broader transformation with all these benefits. The second thing we're seeing is, therefore, in the way it is conducted, Kiran talked about a DPO, but a DPO single-handedly cannot do all of this, right? So what we're seeing is, in a lot of places we're implementing, the DPO team is almost a small internal change, a think tank and change team. And then all the businesses and other stakeholders are involved, right? Whether they are business teams, legal teams, compliance teams, all of them have privacy champions. Technology teams are involved very deeply from the data governance standpoint. So almost we're seeing the core implementation unit is the cyber data teams and technology teams coming together, and then the business teams rally around them for their respective businesses, right? So there is a certain, implementation model that companies and organizations are putting into place to do this. Last question I'll answer, which is, there are people who have moved, there are people who are doing some groundwork, and there are people, organizations who are saying, I'll wait till last day. I think we were joking outside that nothing's going to change by waiting. You will still need to do what you need to do. But for those who are sort of, if I could say, doing the preparatory work or waiting, at least our suggestion is do three things. One, get a sense of a little bit of what Kiran was describing, right? Your key journeys, your key channels, what data you're collecting, what data you're not, almost inventorizing that. The second, I think we suggest is, as you are preparing or doing the groundwork, is to do data discovery. Again, Kiran mentioned it. Understand where it is, how much of it is redundant, how much of it is actually duplicates, where is it going outside, inside, all of that. And the third thing we suggest is make a list, inventorize your third parties and partners, right? What data is going to them from a quantity, frequency, criticality standpoint, right? What kind of data is going to them, almost inventorize them. And then have a sense of your top 10, 20, 30, 50 that you want to build a, what we call a trusted network around, because you'll probably have 1,000. You can't do that with the full set. So that's at least a few thoughts I wanted to share.
No, I think this is real good implementation insights that you have given, right? And one very interesting point that you brought out, it's like not a one unit like CISO or DPO driven gonna be. It's like gonna be completely collaborative, like product team to business to compliance, the legal team. I think when the contract comes between data fiduciary and the processors, right, and tech team. So it's gonna be collaborative. So I'll leave it open. I think lots of the people in the morning also when I was having a DPDPA masterclass, lots of the questions were there. I think people having lots. So I'll just open the floor if any has questions, maybe to Malcolm or Kiran. Please go ahead. सब थक चुके हैं. I think this is good, interesting perspective, right, for the implementation. But Kiran, how do you see you starting the journeys? In case if you can ask as an insurance, Malcolm has already given the brief, right? How the insurance companies should be started doing, but maybe as a CISO, as a DPO, you want to give an inputs to for anybody who wants to start their journey on the implementation.
Yeah, so the first thing is start your data privacy gap assessment. While most of the enterprises are also waiting for detailed rules, but trust me, it's not going to change much. The journey can be still be started as we speak, and it's a big change. It's a cultural change. It's going to touch across all the business processes. So I think sooner we start, we have an ample time to change that culture, to change that business process. So gap assessment is something which we can be immediately started, and at least you get to know how much percentage are you compliant and what are the gaps. Accordingly, you could plan the implementation. I think, and I'll always like in terms of it's always going to be, the future is going to be privacy first going forward, and it's going to change the playbooks in terms of the trust, consent, and security and business process as well. So better is that starting the journey early.
No, I agree with both of gentlemen. Yeah, I think the gentleman has a question. Please, can you someone get mic?
Yeah. So question to Kiran actually. While I understand like assessment to start, the big problem what we observed is that data is so scattered actually. So example is like, first of all, PII data we call it, but do I know in various systems are there where this PII data is really, lying around. Secondly, there are so many of those partner technologies, legacy technology in-house, so much of, other dependencies, the embedded insurance, what we heard. So even their data is captured. Now, the column name of the data can be different. Need not be there, you call it Aadhaar card, but then 12-digit number is across the board. So is there any way, by the way, how we first of all know the data dictionary? And do we really wait for DPDPA? So those two parts, right? I mean, law is one part, but knowing my own data is definitely the case. And do you see that maturity is there? Is there any suggestion to all of us how to go about?
Yeah, so I'm also struggling with that problem, but actually when I started doing the gap assessment, the visibility started coming in. Currently the problem is known to you, not to the CXOs who actually own the data. You are the custodians of the data. You are not the owner of the data. So unless and until you get that visibility out, the sensitization will actually not come out. So start getting that visibility, having that data, duplicated data, or having PII spreaded across. Let that talk about in the gap assessment. Let that come out. Let the visibility be brought on the table of the senior management team. I think that will create that urgency, the amount of, and that exactly is what I'm talking about gaps. There could be much more into it, but at least table up those gaps, and then we get to know that how much compliant or non-compliant we are.
No, thanks. Yeah.
Hi, sir. Sir, my question is, we are saying that we need to have consent in every step. Now, when we have a DIY journey in insurance, so at the time of payment, the customer comes in, tick in the consent, and he completes his details and he does the payment. But I heard in the DPDPA Act that even before the payment, we have to take another consent. So is it the correct thing, or we need not take the consent and we just have to take the consent at the start of the quotation page, and then it's okay because we know that the customer is only going to make the payment?
Malcolm, you would like to?
Yeah, see, I don't know if there's a right or wrong answer to this. I think everybody has their own interpretation to this. I think the law basically says be specific, be transparent about what you're collecting and why, right? Again, organizations have implemented in different ways. You can upfront have a very itemized, notice to say, hey, I'm going to take 5 types. This is what I'm going to take for. You can choose one. Now, some people have said, I don't want to show all 5 at step 1. I want to show 3 at step 1, 1 later, right? So I think in terms of how you want to show it to sort of ensure the best experience, ensure minimal friction, least drop-offs, I think the freedom exists. But at the end of the day, when you capture it at the back end, I think you have to be very clear about what you captured and for what purpose, and that you have to be able to unbundle that purpose, right? I'll give you an example. What I mean is, I'm obviously going to collect email IDs and phone numbers, but I have to be very clear what I'm collecting that for multiple purposes along the way. I could be collecting it for an underwriting purpose, which is perfectly valid. I could be collecting it for, authentication and, all of those. I could also be collecting the same thing for marketing. So at the back end, you have to be very clear that I should be able to, one, have that clarity of different purposes I've collected the same data for. And I should also be able to allow the customer to then say, oh, after a year, 2 years, 5 years, whatever, that I can come back and undo or untick that, right?
Yeah.
So I think how you render it at the front end, you have choice. But whatever you collect, I think internally, and how you capture it and store it in whatever form, we call it consent artifact, you have to be very clear, data attributes, what purpose, which purpose is for business purposes, which purpose is revocable, and allow customers to see that.
Understood.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks. So thanks, Malcolm, and thanks, Kiran. I think I can go on discussion, but I think we'll have to take a pause. So thank you both
Thank you.
for giving us a good insight. Thank you.